Whatever is happening, the revival of religion is mixed up with political conflicts, including an intensifying struggle over the earth's shrinking resources. But there can be no doubt that religion is once again a power in its own right. These are the words by the philosopher Professor John Gray from the London School of Economics. It is true. Religion is up there again with economics and politics as a system influencing and defining what we see or what we think we see, what we think and how we act. Back in 1990, I was living in the UK and studying a foundation course in 20th century studies at an adult education centre in Oxford while I was working during the day as a nanny. The subjects contained within the course were art, literature, politics, science, and philosophy. Our lecturers were PhD students from Oxford University. They needed the money, and in return we got the benefit of youthful enthusiasm and all the knowledge gleaned from their lecturers, who were often world-class leaders in their field. One evening in the philosophy class, we were discussing the directions philosophy might take in the 21st century, and our teacher said that most philosophical questions he thought would be ethical in origin and would be applied to such things as medical technology and the distribution of the Earth's resources. Questions surrounding the existence of God were once big, he said, but not anymore. That's a dead question now, he said. No one's very interested in that anymore. Although, he added, my supervisor says that he senses that those questions about the existence of God may start to come back again in a really big way. But I don't think so. He's a bit nutty. 18 years on, I often wonder who that nutty professor was. Now that I'm a minister, it is entirely possible that I read his work quite frequently, or at least know about it. Whoever he was right. Religion is back, and with many implications for all of us, religious people or otherwise. It was this re-emergence of religion in our public consciousness that led the British political journalist John Humphrys to commission and broadcast a radio series titled Humphrys on God. John Humphrys' usual job is as the anchor of a morning political radio programme on the BBC titled Today. It is much the same as our AM programme on ABC Radio. He is both admired and criticised for his sometimes stern but always probing interrogation of politicians and those people who should be accountable because we put our trust in them. And a fellow Australian living in the UK at one point described him as a much scarier Kerry O'Brien. In his series, Humphrys on God, which was later made into a book titled In God We Doubt, he interviewed 3 religious leaders: Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Chief Rabbi, Jonathan Sacks, and the Muslim academic, Professor Tariq Ramadan. What came out of the interviews was fascinating in many ways. The gentle nature of the programme, and gentle not being an adjective normally associated with John Humphrys, was a stroke of genius, and as such, his approach was far more subversive than those taken by the likes of Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens. A good interviewer can get an interviewee to say far more than he or she intended, and that's exactly what happened with Rowan Williams, Jonathan Sacks, and Tariq Ramadan. When Humphreys raised the question of the suffering of a mother watching her child die of cancer, the Archbishop's first response was, "We don't know why." Humphreys persisted in his questions, and he summarised the Archbishop's answers. "So the best you can offer those parents is, bear up. There's a reason. Your reward will be in heaven." What followed was what Humphreys called an extraordinary moment in the interview. "Is that it?" repeated Humphreys. "No, John, that's not what I offer at all, because the conversation I'd have in those circumstances isn't the kind of conversation I'd have here. For one thing, if someone says, "Where's God?" in that situation, it would have to be answered partly in terms of, where are the people who should be alongside those who are suffering, offering all the love and the healing they can? Whether in the name of God or not, the act of God is there as well. I'm not saying that there's a purpose, in the sense that, oh yes, for that goal, for that end, or even that there's a reward in heaven. I'd say, though, that there is hope. Hope of what? Asked Humphreys. Hope of healing, answered the Archbishop. When? Asked Humphreys. In God's perspective, in God's time. Maybe within this world, but maybe not. And part of the difficulty of living with faith is the knowledge, which you've underlined so powerfully, that for some people in our time frame, there is not that kind of healing. It's not there, and that's not easy to face or live with, the Archbishop replied. But you can live with it, asked Humphreys. Just, said the Archbishop. What the Archbishop is struggling with is the question of theodicy. The Australian philosopher John Mackie describes theodicy in plain terms. He says, God is omnipotent, all-powerful. God is omnibenevolent, all-good. And God is omniscient, all-knowing. And yet, evil exists. There seems to be some contradiction between these positions, so that if any two of them were true, the third would be false. But at the same time, all three are essential parts of most theological positions. The theologian, it seems, at once must adhere and cannot consistently adhere to all three. All religious people must grapple with the question of theodicy. Liberal Anglicans like Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, offer as consolation that God is beside those who suffer. Many fundamentalists, believing as they do in a just world where good people are rewarded and bad people punished, take the view that suffering is inflicted by a just God only on those who deserve it. The Muslim scholar Tariq Ramadan did not tell John Humphreys that the suffering was the result of wickedness. Rather, he took the view that suffering exists, so we need to put up with it. He said, "This is life. We are going to suffer, because at the end of the day, life is suffering." Humphreys asked, "But why did God want that to happen?" Ramadan replied, "I don't know why. Sometimes he makes me happy or sad, but this is life. The only thing I know is that we have a responsibility to do our best with what we do and what we are facing. Suffering is a gift and a problem. We live with this great difficulty, and sometimes out of our suffering we become better, we become wiser, and we become more knowledgeable about life." Ramadan rejected John Humphrey's suggestion that in the end this was just blind faith. He said, "We are dealing with people who are suffering. What you can do when you are a doctor or a social worker, you do your best to make them suffer less. In the end, every human being is a reformer. You reform your own self, your family, you reform society, and you reform all around you. Whatever you can do, you do it. But you must remain humble, because at the end you cannot change everything, and you have to accept the reality of life." To say that suffering exists because life is suffering is an inadequate response in my mind. Ramadan was saying that you should remain humble and not expect an explanation of suffering. It is inadequate, I think. We need to be patient with the current limits of our knowledge, but our current levels of ignorance about the causes of suffering should, I think, see us try to find out the ultimate causes of this suffering, because to relieve suffering in any sustained way surely must be first to know its cause.